What you can see is tiny. What you can't see is massive. If you're only measuring Scope 1 and Scope 2 of the company, you're just measuring the tip of the iceberg. The Scope 3 emissions, the ones hidden below the surface, the ones that are happening in the value chain, are most often more than 70% of the overall emissions. But most companies don't even try to measure it because it's very hard and it's very messy. Today I'm going to show you how to tackle Scope 3 emissions and to break it down into tiny steps so that in the end you can tackle the whole iceberg. In the first step, we want to understand what Scope 3 covers. There are 15 categories within Scope 3 emissions, and those are divided into upstream emissions and downstream emissions. Upstream is everything that happens before it enters your company's gates, and downstream is after it leaves your gates. The really big ones usually are purchased goods and services, business travel, then employee commuting. For many companies it's also transport and distribution, and the use of your goods. Then for other companies the end-of-life treatment becomes very big. Important thing is you don't have to do all the 15 categories from the first day. You best focus on the most important ones first and then add the other ones step by step, if you cannot leave them out totally because they are not relevant at all. After you understood what the Scope 3 emissions cover, the next step is to map your value chain. Typical step 3 then would be to choose your calculation method, and I usually do that per category differently. And even within the categories I might choose the better option if I have more accurate data. The most common way is to go spend-based first, and this is what I would also suggest to everyone. Start with the spend-based method, then you know where your heat map is, where the most important topics are for your company, and these topics you can then dive deeper into. So first, the spend-based method, it's not very accurate. You just look at where do you spend the money, and you go via the categories. So purchased goods, for example, you try to go as accurate as possible. So if you, for example, purchase medical equipment, you would search in a database for CO2 emissions for spend-based data of medical equipment. So this is where I would start first. Make an overview about everything that you buy, everything that you transport. So this is where I would get an overview first, going spend-based with as much as possible, because spend-based is most of the times the easier one. You have the data from the controlling, you have the data from the purchasing department, and you can go quite easily and quickly calculating the most relevant things. Then the next category would be activity-based data. So if, for example, you have the kilometers transported for the goods that you produced, you can go directly into that. It's a bit more accurate, and you can calculate according to the vehicles that you use and the fuels used and the kilometers traveled. So that is becoming more and more accurate. And then the last and most accurate method would be then to get supplier-specific data. So for example, if you see in your first analysis that you purchase a lot of the same goods, it might make a lot of sense to go into supplier-specific data to see whether you can get that, and then calculate by the kilograms used or tons used of these materials or of these products and get the accurate data in. But really, this doesn't make sense if you are just calculating like small amounts of anything, which then doesn't make a big difference in the overall. I would go for supplier-specific data if it's available, and I would go for it for the big purchases and for the big things, big categories that you have. For example, if you are purchasing a lot of metal, it makes sense to go into that in detail, but not if you're purchasing like the standard office supply, like paper or pens. Step 4 is then, well, it's not really a step, it's more like avoiding the traps. So don't overcomplicate it. Make it, for the first time you make the calculations, make it as simple as possible. Go spend-based first and then go into more accurate data afterwards. Also, there's software available which can help you a lot. I would suggest to use the software that is dedicated for Scope 3 emissions, and well, the other scopes are easy anyway, so those are included usually. But software with the emission factors that you need for Scope 3 emissions makes a lot of sense. It saves you hours of work. Then step 5, after you calculated your iceberg, is to go into action. And I like to really start with the heat map. I like to know where the iceberg is the thickest, where I can have the biggest gains, and I want to see whether I can change anything. Well, sometimes it's not easy to change things, but then it makes sense to look deeper into this as well. So looking at the hotspots first, trying to optimize those and redesign products, for example, redesign services and save emissions for the biggest emitters first. Good option can also be to optimize your transports, your logistics, but that is very dependent on whether this is a big part in your business, and also to go into discussions with customers and with suppliers to optimize everything around carbon footprint together, because if they change something, it might be even very beneficial for your carbon footprint as well.